Greetings. This is Chapter 9. We are looking at mixed mode designs. This material is from Jeanne Ellis Ormrod. It's from her book Practical Research, Design and Process, the 13th edition. This material is to be used with your textbook. It is the author's slides. I'm augmenting it verbally with both breaking this up into sections so we can break it into videos and with experiences I've had in my own dissertation and research. So we've gone through five mixed mode designs. There will be others presented by Crestwell, which you can find in Crestwell's mixed mode designs. But we're now going to go into the phase where we plan a mixed mode study, and many of you may need to do that. So when you're planning a mixed mode study, identify your research questions and a hypothesis. There's a general framework where you might want to ask the quantitative question, to what extent the blank exhibits something, okay? Do blank have more or less of the quality one than quality two? Is there a correlation between the uh, one thing that you might see in a church with effective church executions? And does conflict, for example, have an effect on churches? These forms that is the quantitative question. So you're going to have those questions, and then you're going to have qualitative questions about the same data. Some event educating a program in the church, we might have what is the general nature of the learning process for adult learners in the church? Is it different with technology? What do people think and feel about it? Another question what is the general nature of social media for a Christian? How do people think and feel about it? How did the participants in the sample feel about it? You will have some sort of sample. So these questions help you plan it. Conduct most of the research literature review to work on your mixed mode study at the beginning. It helps you pin down the questions, the hypothesis for the quantitative. It suggests methodological strategies for the qualitative. For example, when you finally understand that you're seeing a phenomena, then you will probably work for a phenomenological study. If you're seeing that you're looking at content from written material, that may have you in a content qualitative study. It will reveal potentially helpfully instruments. And as I mentioned in the previous presentations, I used the histometric guidelines for mixed mode, which looks at history guidelines for examination of leadership studies in history, but they have specific guidelines on how to do coding for the qualitative portion of it that looks at historical documents so that quantitative data can be examined as well. The studies of two or more may have two or more phases. Now, what about choosing sampling? If you have a probability sampling, you have a large population and you can have a stratified or random cluster. When you look at the Barna surveys, realize they are going for large populations of pastors within the unit. US, it is stratified in that they're asking for pastors, but it's random beyond that to see who they will send things to. The purposeful sampling, again, is part of the Barna. They are looking for particular participants who can provide certain perspectives. Perhaps they want to go to Protestant pastors in the South. That's a particular perspective. It may take many forms. Studies with two or more forms may take different phases or may be linked. What about reasonable credibility? Well, we've gone through quantitative credibility and qualitative credibilities. In addition, There are 6 questions suggested in the textbook for mixed mode that you should consider. Do the samples justify the comparison, especially if you're doing a histometric study? And I use histometric techniques to look at uh, biblical and extra biblical writings, which we'll go through. Do the samples justify the comparison? That's part of the methodology. Is all data equally relevant to the topic of the research question? Are there biases in the collection and the interpretation of both data? You come with biases if you're doing theological research with the things you find for your personal theology, or that you work within a denomination that has theological biases. You also work with your history and your cultural. Is the impact the same or differing from samples with different sizes for quant and qual data? You have to really work at that. In my mixed mode study of leadership of internet standards, I found I could gather quite an immense amount of qual data from documents that were online. But the sample size there was huge, but the percentage was only 10%. I also was able to get a quantitative where I got 40 to 60% of the responses, but the size for the total population was small. So that left my analytics short of some abilities for interesting inferential statistics. So do the qualitative annotations, are they used to support the qualitative? Do you get the same conclusions? Ask these questions. I've gone through this in detail and worked through it. And the interesting thing is they pointed out problems with methodology. When you analyze and interpret the data, the procedures depend on the kind of study, the data collected, the nature of the problems or the questions. Quantitative has usually one or more statistical analysis. Qualitative often involves multi-step coding process using 2 or more raters. Again, in my own work, I set a code book using 3 raters in a combination with expertise in looking at group dynamics. I then did the coding for my dissertation of the rest of the material on my own. That left some potential of bias, but restricted it based on the coding procedure. You have to integrate the quantitative and qualitative, and you have to draw inferences from each form of data. And I found in the end, when I had quantitative and qualitative, I combined all of the quantitative together and looked at one picture, all the qualitative, and then looked at a qualitative analysis of both. Now, you need to, in this, adhere to the ethical guidelines discussed for quantitative and qualitative, but you need to also think what things are added when you put these pieces of data together. If they're asked, if your participants are asked to perform tests they hadn't previously agreed to, you have to seek and obtain their written consent. Let's say you want to have them review some of your data as a check on the results. Well, you have to seek and obtain their written consent. It is something that I tripped over myself and had to go back and make sure that people who were going to perform the rune agreed to consent to this. Even though the data was open, their review was something I had to ask for. Well, that's the example. Please look at Chapter 9. Find time to study mixed mode, because my guess is that you will end up with more mixed mode than you think in your final research project. But I'll find that out as you work on your proposal for your class project. Thank you again for listening, and I hope this has been helpful.